Good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year. I'm Whitney Keys, the Executive Director of Seattle City Club, and I want to welcome you to Legislative Preview 2022. For over 40 years, Seattle City Club has built the foundation for an informed, connected, and engaged community. And we do this through our nonpartisan programs. This year, like many other nonprofits and organizations, we have adapted to the pandemic. We have done this over the past couple of years. And what we have done is created a diverse set of virtual programs. And they range from civic cocktails, civic boot camps, debates through our Washington State Debate Coalition, Engage, and our Year in Review. Today, we are excited to host Legislative Preview, and this is one of our longest running programs. This is where we bring Washington State top leaders from both sides of the aisle to share their perspectives on policies and initiatives that will directly impact our communities. The only way we can do this type of programming is through generous support from our sponsors. And this year we have 3 Legislative Preview sponsors that I'd like to recognize: PEMCO Insurance, Boeing, and Puget Sound Energy. We also want to recognize all of our annual partners: Comcast, AARP, Alaska Airlines, Salesforce, Tableau, Amazon, Microsoft, the Gates Foundation, Muckleshoot Indian Tribe, Davis Wright Tremaine, Lane Powell, Sea City, Seattle Metro Chamber, Tulalip Tribes, Seattle University, Virginia Mason Franciscan Health, Zillow, Fred Hutch, and Columbia Bank. Thanks so much to all of our Seattle City Club board members and staff that are with us today, as well as our community members and valued partners. Again, we could not do this work without them fueling our mission. And we especially appreciate those of you that financially support our critical work. We couldn't produce programs like this without your contributions. As a nonpartisan civics organization, we continue to be laser focused on addressing polarization and bridging toward real solutions. Our democracy needs us now. So if you haven't yet, please consider making a financial gift to support our mission. And you can do that through seattlecityclub.org. So today, again, we are here for Legislative Preview, and I want to take a moment to recognize and appreciate our 2 moderators. We are very fortunate to have seasoned journalists from 2 different media outlets. We have Melissa Santos from Crosscut, KCTS9, and Hannah Scott from Cairo Radio. So Hannah and Melissa, I will let you take the program from here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we'd like to welcome Senate Majority Leader Andy Billig, Senate Republican Leader John Braun, Speaker of the House Lori Jenkins, and House Republican Leader JT Wilcox. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm going to jump straight into questions because I'm sure people would like to hear from you. So I'd like to start by asking about the state's long-term care program, which really is not off to the start that I think maybe all would have hoped. More than 450,000 Washingtonians have applied to opt out of this program, and which is designed to give people about $36,000 over the course of their lifetime to help pay for nursing care. Several of you here today have now said you favor delaying the program and the 0.58% payroll tax that pays for it. And I know Democratic lawmakers have introduced some bills to both expand the program and also to let more people opt out. So I'd like to start with Speaker Jenkins. I believe you were the prime sponsor of this bill in the legislature before you became Speaker. Why is this delay necessary, and how do you manage to keep the program solvent if you make these big changes? Can you still award a meaningful benefit amount without substantially raising the tax to pay for this program?
Yeah, thanks, Melissa and Hannah. It's great to be here with you. And Whitney, it's great to be on a City Club event. I live in Tacoma, and the Tacoma City Club was the first civic organization I joined when I moved to Tacoma. So great to be here. Yeah, I think the short answer to your question, Melissa, is yes. We can continue to provide a meaningful benefit. But let me just kind of ground where we're at. The whole point of the CARES Act and the passage of the bill is that we were seeing that people had to spend themselves into poverty in order to get long-term care that they needed. We know that 7 out of every 10 Washingtonians are going to need long-term care at some point, and that 90% of those people have no way to pay for long-term care. We wanted to avoid seniors having to spend themselves into poverty. So that remains the whole goal of the program. What we've done and what we're working on doing, Representative Sullivan has a bill out there right now to do an 18-month implementation extension. That bill will also address near-term retirees, kind of like me, who are in that 10-year window where I might pay in but not achieve the 10 years. We'll see how long I stay in the House, but not achieve the 10 years before I retire, right? And so we are going to address that. And then Dave Paul has a bill that will address kind of some folks that no one ever really discussed when the bill was passed, to allow for opt-outs for disabled veterans, military spouses. We also address folks who live out of state and work here in Washington. So the whole goal of the implementation extension is to really work out some of these issues that have been identified over the last few months, make sure that we've got the program on very stable grounds. One thing is you mentioned the number of opt-outs, a pretty high number of opt-outs. One of the things I'm pleased about is I went back and looked last night, the original modeling for the program actually assumed this level of opting out. And that's what the premium was based on. So I don't think we will be in a difficult position in that regard, but this will provide some time for the actuaries to look at that and see if there's anything that we need to alter or do in order to address that issue.
Senator Braun, I see you're unmuted. Do you have some thoughts on if the 18-month delay is the right approach for the Long-Term Care Act, WCARES? Would you like to see some other avenues taken when it comes to this program, which again is a payroll tax that pays for nursing services, is the idea down the road?
Yeah, so I think we've been pretty clear since 2019 when this first passed. This plan, it's a real problem, I should say, that we need to help folks plan for their retirement and their healthcare issues as they grow older. But this plan doesn't work well. It never has. And we tried to help improve it as it passed off the floor in 19. We were unsuccessful in most ways. And frankly, at this point, we can delay it. I'm certainly not going to oppose delaying it, but I think we'd be better off repealing it, starting over, working on the problem from scratch, and really including everyone in the conversation instead of pushing this across as a partisan solution. Include everyone. I think you get a better balance, better solution that fits everyone around the state.
Well, maybe Senator Billigor, Speaker, if you want to jump in on this, why not just repeal it and try something new?
Well, I think the reason that we should implement this program is because it's needed. This was a bipartisan idea. It actually was even bipartisan in the end with votes from both sides of the aisle. But the reason that it had such support originally is because this huge need, and when I say originally, very strong bipartisan support, is because of this need and because of this drain on the general fund that we're going to have as our population ages and everybody needs this long-term care. That's all going to fall on the state general fund if we don't have an alternative plan. So the foundation, the philosophy behind this, the theory behind it, all really sound. And we just need to keep working some of the tweaks that we've been talking about and make sure that we implement it in a really successful way. And just one other thing I wanted to mention is Washington has been leading the way on long-term care. We are recognized across the nation as a leader, particularly in helping people to age in place. And that's what Washington Cares does, is because it's really designed to help people to stay in their homes and give them the supports they need to stay in their homes, which helps them to age with dignity, gives them better quality of life, saves them money, and saves the state money. So that's why we should keep it, because it's going to work.
Hey, Melissa, if I may, I just want to be clear about the claim that this is bipartisan. Look, one Republican in the legislature voted for this. We had more Democrats vote against it than voted for it. This was not a bipartisan voted on plan.
It was co-sponsored. It was co-sponsored by Republicans, and it became clear, Melissa, toward the end of this that this program was going to be made into a political issue rather than a policy issue. But it doesn't matter. Where we're focused is making sure that people don't have to spend themselves into poverty. They get the care they need. The updates and the implementation work that we're going to do on this bill are all about making sure people get that care and that we move forward.
Okay.
Again, not a political issue. It's a math issue. It's a math
I totally
issue.
get what you're saying. I also have a lot of questions I want to get to, and I bet we can talk about this the whole time. And also, Representative Wilcox, we're absolutely going to have you address some questions in the future. Hannah has a question she wants to ask about a different topic.
Hi, hello, everybody. Good morning. Senator Doss and Representative Bateman this week have introduced companion legislation that's a governor request that would do the statewide allowance for middle housing across the state in most all cities, in most all places near transit with 20,000 population or higher. I am wondering what you think of that plan, if you support it, and if you do not support it, what is your solution to the affordable housing crisis we have right now? I'll start with you, actually, Leader Wilcox. And if he is
sorry.
There you are.
I had been unmuted before. And anyway, first of all, I've heard a lot of talk about cost of housing and housing availability. And one of the good things is we're all coming together. Republicans have been talking about this for years. We've consistently opposed every bill that made it harder to build housing and made it more expensive to build housing. We're seeing lots of bills that make it more expensive happen right now. And I think it's absolutely true that restrictions in the past and present have contributed to this catastrophe. I heard the speaker say the other day that we were 250,000 housing units short, which means that there's no way to solve this problem without a huge engagement by the private sector. You can't do this with public housing alone. I'm in favor of having local governments decide that this is the right thing to do. I think it'll work better when they do that. But at the same time, this idea that you demonize where you can build and where you can't build is crazy. There are plenty of places where there is employment and no housing that is not necessarily close to transit. And I know of many, many rural employers whose employees are traveling long distances because you can't build houses in small towns, small cities, and rural areas. So let's open our minds a little bit, understand that more than urban areas need the ability to house people, and people don't want to live exactly where some very ideological people want them to live.
And then do you think it's okay for the state to have that control and not the local jurisdictions?
You know, I think it would be much better if localities decided that for themselves. And there's a lot of political energy behind this. I think that they're fully capable of doing that.
And anyone else who wants to jump in on that question, I'd love to hear your responses.
Well, just in terms of solutions, I mean, I think this is something we should be looking at and try to find that right balance between local control and making sure that we've got that density. Remember, density is also the most cost-effective way to build, because you've already got the services there. You already have the fire and the police coverage. You already have the sewer and the water. So it makes the most sense for a lot of reasons, and certainly for environmental reasons, it can make sense. But I just want to talk about what else we're doing and what else we've been doing. Last year was a historic investment in the capital budget in housing, $350 million. Senator Frocht, as the lead on the capital budget, did a great job in guiding that on the Senate side, and $175 million, a historic amount, into the Housing Trust Fund. Now, what happens is it takes a little time for these things to come online, but the good news is we've been making these investments the last few years, so they're going to start paying off, and these housing investments are going to start coming online. And, one of the reasons that we have a housing crisis, a lot of reasons happening all over the country, but one of the reasons, particularly in Washington State, is because a lot of people moved here. And that's great. People want to move here because we've got great schools. We've got this beautiful natural environment. We've got an incredible thriving economy here. We've got strong choice laws, strong gun safety laws, a lot of reasons people want to live in Washington State. And that's one of the reasons that we've got a housing crisis.
Yeah. Hey, I just want to hop in on here. I'm not opposed to everything that Senator Billy just said, and we supported this in the vote. But as Representative Wilcox said, add it up. Again, this is a math issue. Roughly $525 million put into public housing or affordable housing, 1,000 homes roughly, if you take the average cost. We're 250,000 homes short. This is not going to solve the problem unless we engage the private sector. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, I'll just add in on this one and say that, more housing that is far away from where people live, work, and play, go to school and things like that really just drives up costs. It makes longer commutes. It makes more time away from family. So I think we really need to think about those things. I want to just summarize what I think the debate is going to be around the bill that you referenced. It is about creating more density and more options in these areas where people already live and work and go to school and all those things. But I'm in Tacoma. Our city council just spent the last 2 years developing a plan, really fully vetting it, and it changed a lot from what was initially proposed to what we have now. And that kind of community engagement is super important. But I think that's, that goes toward this should be local control. The part that goes toward this shouldn't be local control is when you have local governments who just say, we will not engage. And then it puts all of the burden and pressure on those who are willing to engage. And that is not equitable at all. So I think those are kinds of where you're going to see the debate go back and forth. I don't exactly have a prediction on how this bill will end up moving through, but I think there will likely be changes to it, and we'll see what the conversation's like and how it progresses.
Thank you. And in the interest of more questions, I'll toss it back to Melissa.
Thank you. Last year's legislature passed a dozen police reform bills following the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis and the Black Lives Matter protests that followed worldwide. These new state laws include restrictions on certain tactics by police, such as chokeholds and vehicle pursuits, and new limits on uses of force by police. Some police, as you've heard, have said these new laws prevent them from keeping communities safe, including limiting their response to mental health calls and the ability to pursue some suspects. Senator Braun, I believe you have a bill to outright repeal the use of force bill that the legislature passed last year, or maybe someone in your caucus at least does. House Bill 1310 was that bill. Why would repeal maybe be the right approach rather than making some of the tweaks that I've heard Democrats talk about when it comes to this policing issue?
That's a good question. And I don't know that an outright repeal is the right answer. I think we need to have all options on the table. We've been very clear. We're supportive of reasonable reform to law enforcement. We just don't want to take away the tools, the tactics, put them in a situation where they cannot keep our community safe. And in particular, I'm very concerned about their impact on the ability to cooperate and with the mental health services around our state. This is a big deal where I live, where historically our law enforcement has worked very well with mental health providers to keep them and their clients safe. And this is not working. So whether it's a repeal or reform, the reform bills, I'm sort of indifferent. What I don't want to do is kind of put some window dressing on it, say we fixed it, and then walk away and leave our communities unsafe for another year.
Speaker Jenkins, these bills, in particular, that I've gotten the most criticism, the bills that have gotten the most criticism came out of the House. So Speaker Jenkins, what do you think needs to be done to address some of these issues? I know there's talk of making some changes. Are they only small changes needed, and what should that look like?
Well, I think that, I guess, let me just start off, Melissa, by saying I am very proud of the leaders in our caucus, especially Representative Johnson and Representative Goodman, on their absolute persistence on knowing that we need to address these issues on trust with our law enforcement community. These bills were all passed really to set standards across the state and to make sure that we were rebuilding trust between local communities and their law enforcement communities, because we need our police officers to do good work and to help protect and watch out over our community. I think there are three big issues, actually maybe four, I think that we're really trying to address. First issue, we have a bill by Representative Bernofsky. There was in error, there was a prohibition against using less lethal alternatives like bean bags and rubber bullets. And I think this is just an interesting example of what happens in a legislative session. Everybody was at the table discussing this bill, law enforcement, advocates, legislators. They were meeting multiple times a week, and folks just didn't realize the way the bill was drafted that it would have this, this exclusion. So we're gonna address that. And this is a somewhat typical thing that happens. A lot of a legislator's life is actually updating bills that have previously been passed. Second bill is prime sponsored by Rep. Johnson, and it addresses the mental health issues that Senator Braun talked about, making sure that law enforcement officers can use force subject to the reasonable care standard when it comes to welfare checks, mental health issues, child welfare, things like that. The Attorney General's office has already said that the bills don't prohibit any of that by law enforcement, but because law enforcement has expressed a confusion about that, we're very happy to make it absolutely clear to help them. And then the third issue has to do with the threshold of whether or not you can use force, whether or not you have to have probable cause or reasonable cause. And so Roger Goodman has a bill saying that probable cause standard that was set in bills last year will go back down to reasonable cause for violent offenses, sex offenses, assaults, and things like that. And then I think one of JT's caucus members, Rep. Robertson in the 31st, who's I think a former state patrol officer, has something on vehicle pursuits. I haven't looked at that bill very much, so I'm not, but I think that is something that there's a desire to look at vehicle pursuits and see what we can do there. So I think those are some of the things that we'll look at doing.
Representative Wilcox, the speaker mentioned something from your caucus. Is there additional changes you would like to see going forward here with these measures?
You know, Melissa, with all respect to you, I think that's the wrong question. Last session was all about what did legislators want to do? And the result of that was deeply flawed bills. Lots of people could see the flaws. If you look at the debate in these, you'll find that every single one of these problems was anticipated, but it was about what legislators wanted to do rather than what would keep the most people safe. And I've said from the very beginning, our job should be to preserve the tools that are necessary to keep us safe and reduce the likelihood of them being misused as much as is humanly possible. And I think we've got an opportunity to do that now. On final passage for one of the major bills, I addressed the the sponsor, Representative Johnson, and told him I had confidence that he was going to listen now and that we knew that there had been overreach. Sadly, there's been tragedies because of that. The bills came about because there had been tragedies across the country and in our own state as well. And those are important to address, but with, you know, a little more humility and a little more regard for people that have been doing this for a long time, we would not have that. And so I would just say, let's go ahead, have hearings on these bills, make sure that nobody feels intimidated so that they can't provide the most honest and helpful input, and then have bills that we can all agree on at the end of the session and pass
on. Senator Billigel, I think we're going to come back to you on a different question. I'd like to move on to Hannah, if it's okay, for a different topic at this point.
I just want to add in one quick data point for folks, Melissa, on this. At least some of the tragedies that have been avoided with these bills is that Washington is at a 5-year low for fatal police encounters in the last year. So we got more work to do. We got balance that we need to achieve, but that's a good thing, a very good thing.
Thank you.
The governor exercised his emergency powers routinely and has done so since the start of the pandemic, whether it be restrictions on, lockdowns, shutting down businesses, vaccine mandates, mask mandates. And there's obviously been a lot of debate about this. I'd like to start with Republicans on this one. How would you like to see the relationship between the legislature and the governor change? And what, if any, would you like to see regarding the emergency powers?
Well, I'll start, I guess. First of all, let me tell you what I think we need to preserve. There's a clear need for emergency powers. I don't think anyone seriously argues that we shouldn't have a chief executive that has the ability to do emergency powers. And second of all, we need to have more of what exists in a very small way, and that is legislative oversight. These powers were granted to the governor, some of them dating back into the 80s, with the expectation that there would be catastrophes that would make it impossible or really hard for the legislature to get together or communicate with the governor. And I don't think anyone ever imagined that it would be more than, a few weeks or a few months. So we're over 700 days in now. There is no way in the state of Washington, short of the governor. The legislature actually could end the state of emergency, or the governor could end it. What bothers me the most about this is not always the specific things that the governor does, but the fact that we have a three-branch system of government, and one of them is being mostly ignored now. And I know that the majority will say, well, we talked to him sometimes and we approved many of his. Yeah, they extended them indefinitely. That doesn't seem to me like the legislature doing its part. And to me, it's very corrosive to, our system of government. Now, the other thing that I think shouldn't end is the majority should decide. So the House Republicans have dropped a last bill that is the bill that I would want if I were Speaker and the governor was a Republican. It says you still have these powers, but you have to check in with the legislature. And just as importantly, the legislature can't just say, fine, do what you want, Governor. The legislature has to go on record, every individual agreeing that this is a good thing. And I don't see how that is a bad thing or a scary thing to the majority either. They get to decide.
And if I could go to Senator Braun, and I'll ask for Democrats to weigh in.
I don't think there's a lot I can add from what JT said. Look, we aren't proposing changes to the emergency powers statutes that would somehow, that I think are partisan at all. They're simply keeping the legislature involved in the process, that they have to come in and validate or support the proclamations that the governor makes after, there's been proposals for 30 days or 60 days. Regardless, the idea that we have emergency powers is clear. We need that. But also we need to have our government functioning as envisioned in our Constitution, and frankly, as the people of the state of Washington expect. They expect the folks they elected to show up in Olympia and present their perspective and take a vote. And then it's up to the people to hold those elected officials responsible. We're just leaving out a whole section for 2 years almost, a whole portion of our government, and it's not right. And again, as JT said, we're still in the minority. We don't expect to get our way in this. That's not how it works. We get that, but the legislature should be involved.
And Democrats, I would like to know if there should be any curtailing of the emergency powers.
Yeah, yes, I will answer that. But first, I just want to push back on the idea that the legislature has not been involved or hasn't had oversight. We, as was mentioned, the four of us have to weigh in to extend proclamations, and then the legislature, if it's in session, does that as a whole legislature. We had a whole 105-day session where we considered bills to potentially limit the emergency powers. So we did consider those, and we did make changes. One of the areas that was a particular problem was when federal money came in, that the governor had really significant power to allocate that money. So we passed a law that says that there has to be a very specific process, and we created a process to insert more legislative control in the distribution of that money. We also informally get consulted. We have the ability to call ourselves into special session. So there are all kinds of checks and oversights that we have. So it's just, you know, the legislative branch has been involved in this process. Now, I actually agree with what Senator Braun and Representative Wilcox have said, that, you know, these laws weren't created with a pandemic in mind. So it does make sense that we look at them again, just as we did in the last session, that we look at them again and maybe make some changes to make sure that, yes, in the emergency, we've got one person in charge, which is what we really need, but to make sure that, you know, we're continually updating these laws to make sure they work in the best way possible to help our recovery and to help for the future emergencies that we don't even know might be coming.
Speaker Jenkins.
Yeah, I'll just add in, I mean, I'm glad, I think you hear some real commonality here, agreement that emergency powers need to exist, that this has been and is an emergency, but also that there needs to be oversight of these emergency powers. I have a feeling that the theme of this session is going to be seeking balance. And so I think that, you know, that's what we'll be trying to do. I expect that we'll hear some bills on oversight of emergency powers and things like that. I'll just give an interesting aside. I work for public health in my other career, and that's happening right now at the local health department that I work in. We've been in incident command for, you know, over 2 years now. And these kinds of emergency structures were not built to last that long. They weren't anticipating this kind of emergency. It doesn't mean that the emergency doesn't exist anymore, but it does mean that we should think about the evolution of the emergency and what we do about it. So I'm in both of my jobs, I'm having lots of questions that we're struggling with right now.
Thank you. I'll toss this back to Melissa.
Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about the budget. The state has seen just a huge influx in revenue just during these last few quarters beyond what was expected. And, you know, the state also has $1 billion or so in unspent federal COVID relief money. What would each of you like to do with this money, and where would you focus it, especially when it comes to helping the people of the state get through this pandemic? I think we started with Republicans last time, so maybe Senator Billig, if you could kick us off.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa, for that question. Yeah, I mean, the fact that while there are many people struggling and we have to provide the support to make sure that this recovery works for everyone, the fact is our economy is actually doing well. And I'm proud of the decisions that we collectively have made as a state to be able to help get us to this point, and the ingenuity and sacrifice and hard work of the people of our state that have gotten us to this point of a strong economy now. So what we need to do is take those investments, which we've been making, right? We've been leading the way on COVID recovery and investing in public health and investing in housing and childcare and mental health treatment. We have to keep those investments going and make sure we're doing it really strategically so that it helps this recovery work for everyone. Now, a couple things in particular that we've talked about. Housing, I think, will be a real focus this year. We did the biggest childcare and early learning bill in the history of our state last year with the Fair Start Act. That was a huge step forward, but we've got more work to do on childcare as well. Mental health treatment and substance abuse treatment, we know, is an area that still needs more work. So I think we'll see investments in all of those. I think we also have to look at the balance. Last year, we did a really big a bill that was for years the Democratic idea that we were able to get bipartisan support for the working families tax credit, which will put money right back in the pockets of the people that need it most. We could look at tweaking that to enlarge it a little bit, but maybe some other programs we're giving money back, like Senator Randall has a bill to get rid of the tolls on the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. And so I think we need to look at some other areas like that. And the last thing I'll say is we've got huge transportation needs, and I'm hoping that we're able to put together a transportation package so that we can really invest in those needs throughout the state.
Representative Wilcox, I was hoping to have you share some of your ideas, thoughts about what he said, or other ideas you have for spending some of this money.
Okay, well, thank you. And I'm glad that we're talking about the economy. The recent poll from your publication said that was the #1 concern on the mind of Washingtonians, and it was a pretty large proportion. Hasn't been at the top since 2014. So that should tell us that people expect us to do something to help them in that sense, and that there's a ton of insecurity. And my guess is this week, There's a whole bunch more sense of insecurity about something that's related to the economy, and that's empty store shelves and running out of supplies in all kinds of arenas because we have every single pass closed at a time when the governor has let go a number of the people that would have helped us open those. And we've also got our north-south corridor closed because of flooding. And we cannot just take food security and security in terms of the travel of goods and service around the state for granted, because we are always on a knife's edge with those kinds of things. And I think it's going to get worse this week before it gets better. So I've already asked people, look, take care of your neighbors, look out for each other, and don't be angry at all those truckers that are stranded on one side of the mountains or the other that might be parking in your neighborhood and plugging things up. But to get back to a little more direct part of your question, you know, we have plenty of transportation investments that we have to make, and we can use those dollars to make a lot of those. The other thing is, and this ties back to insecurity and housing, the biggest component of housing costs besides just the mortgage payment, if you're buying a home, is property tax. It is an immense number for people that own their own homes. It's been skyrocketing because of the shortage of houses and the increasing valuations. And we allowed an agreement to lapse that made a big impact on the increasing cost of property tax. And of course, renters don't directly pay that, but if costs have anything to do with what people pay, the price of housing, then of course this huge component of property tax is a big part of that. So we ought to go back to the old agreement that you're well aware of, where the state was paying its fair share of school expenses. And at the same time, we had a much, much lower cap on the local component of property taxes. And that would provide instant relief across the state.
Really quickly, because I want to get to some other questions. Madam Speaker, do you have thoughts on restoring those levy caps so that the state pays a little more and local property taxes are a little less?
Well, I mean, you know, it was 2017 where Republicans insisted that we increase the property tax in order to pay for our schools. So I guess I'm glad that there's been some come around the circle on that one. And so we're certainly happy to look at that. But Republicans were in control in the Senate that year. After that, Democrats took control, but that was their insistence of how we addressed McCleary. But again, we're always happy to talk about those things. I think many of the issues that have been raised, we're looking at too. I just want to raise a couple of other things I think that we'll look at doing to try and help people with costs, and those are in the higher ed area. The Washington College grant has been incredibly successful, but we have folks who aren't eligible for it and that maybe would need student loans, and we're looking at implementing a low interest student loan program that would be lower interest than any of the federal loans available and things like that could help students pay for college. Likewise, the college grant really pays for tuition, but it doesn't help pay for rent and food and other costs. So Vandana Slaughter has a bill to do that. And then the other thing I just would note is I'm really happy that Rep. Wilcox mentioned the extreme weather events that we're having. And I'm proud of the investments that we've made in addressing climate change last year, because those are going to help with these in the long run. And we're going to have to keep on investing in addressing climate change if we want to avoid these extreme weather events.
Melissa, if you don't mind.
I really want to kick it back to Hannah and Senator Braun. We're going to have you answer in some other questions here, I think.
And I'm going to just divert from our plan, Melissa, and because Speaker Jenkins talked about climate change, we also saw, I believe yesterday, another bill from Senator Doss. It's a large climate bill that is the Renew Recycling Act, I believe is what it's called. And essentially what this does is require any packaging from now on to be reusable, recyclable, or compostable. And if not, then the businesses would have to pay extra. Speaker Jenkins and then Senator Billig, I'd like to hear from both of you on this before Republicans.
I haven't seen the bill at all or read it, Hannah. I think we've seen this issue with plastic utensils, with shopping bags, with things like that. And the thing that we've been really successful doing, I think, as a legislature, is working with all the stakeholder community, like on plastic bags, really working with our grocers and making sure it's a good thing it is good to do for the environment, but it's complex for our business community. So making sure that we can work with those communities on these issues. And we've actually been able to get to really good spots over and over again on this. So I would expect, again, that balance issue is coming up here.
Similar, I don't know the details of the bill, but stewardship of products and of packaging, I think, is important. I think we've taken some really big steps in the last few years, and Washington's really leading the way on this issue. But I can't comment on the specifics of that bill, but I'm sure it's something that we'll be considering.
All right, if Republicans want to weigh in, go right ahead. If not, we can move on.
Hey, I'll jump in on this. So this is, I'm a big fan of recycling. I think we historically have done a reasonable job in the state of Washington, although it's gotten worse in part because there hasn't been balance. We've run bills out of the legislature that restrict the ability of businesses and communities to manage recycling in a way that works for their citizens, and frankly drives the cost up. So it's going back to the earlier question. It's one more way that the majority is proposing to drive up costs for citizens around the state of Washington. And if there's interest in balance, we're certainly game to participate and provide a more balanced approach that hopefully doesn't drive up costs and keeps our state clean and healthy. But we haven't seen that so far. So I eagerly anticipate that in the future.
Leader Wilcox, anything to add?
I think this has been thoroughly discussed.
Okay. And I'm going to back to where I was supposed to start. And I would start with you, actually, Senator Braun, on this. Last year, we saw some record investment in behavioral health, largely due to the Blake fix and the need for mandatory treatment for a lot of diversion under that. And also, we're still continually, years into the issues with Western State, seeing issues with prosecutors where they have a person who is found that can't be competent for trial, sent to Western State. Western State doesn't have the room. These dangerous criminals are sent back out into less restrictive alternatives and are a danger to the community. There doesn't seem to be a sense of urgency to address that. And it speaks to so much. And Senator Braun, you gave a passionate speech about the need for treatment last session at the end there on the Blake fix. That's why I wanted to start with you. What are your thoughts on the urgency and the investment going into these behavioral health issues?
Well, thanks, Anna. Those are wide-ranging and somewhat related, certainly, but different issues. The broader investment in mental health has been going on for a number of years now. It's been bipartisan. I think that's one area where we all been in agreement. And the frustrating thing for many of us is it's taking a long time, whether it's replacing the facilities at Western States, whether it's building community facilities around the state, whether it's building our workforce through investment in the Northwest campus for University of Washington and building mental health workforce. It's just taken a long time. There is some frustration, but we are making progress. Now, with regard to the Blake decision, that was the decision that essentially legalized hard drugs around our state. It was a disastrous decision. And frankly, I thought the bill we passed out of the Senate originally was a very good middle of the road compromise that would both recognize that the war on drugs, as we fought it for decades, is not working, but also recognize that you have to have law enforcement involved at some level if you're going to both keep our community safe and, more importantly to me personally, help the folks who are subject to drug addiction or substance abuse get the treatment and stay in the treatment that they need. Right now, we've passed a bill, what ended up a bill that we have referrals. When we passed it, nobody could even describe what a referral was. It essentially amounts to the police officer pulling up beside the person who has a substance abuse issue, giving them a card that says you can get some treatment down the street, have a good day. That's it. That does nothing to make our community safer, and it does nothing to help that person recover from their substance abuse. I'm pretty motivated by this because of a personal experience with this in my family, and it's important that we have some leverage to get people in treatment and keep people in treatment. If we don't, people will die, and it's tragic.
Anyone else who wants to weigh in on that issue?
Yeah, I will. This actually has been a place with a lot of Republican and Democrat agreement and just as importantly, collaboration on how do you fix this, not just in terms of, setting a certain amount of money, but, what can you do as far as policy? However, I think, we're not going to be facing the problem if we don't also face the fact that the same person has been in charge for of every executive branch for 10 years now. And the legislature can send money, they can make broad policy, but only one person is responsible for execution in the execution of policy and management in state agencies. That's the governor. And this is the thing that I think all of you should be asking him every time he calls a press conference, because it is critical.
I'll just, if I may, is that I want to add in, and I agree with, most of what Senator Braun said. And I think this is an issue where we've been able to work across the aisle. It's certainly been a priority. It's been a priority for I think, most members of the legislature. I think we're really lucky. We have a leader on this issue in Senator Manka Dhingra, who's spent most of her professional life working as a prosecutor, but specifically related to mental health and substance abuse issues. And having her as the chair of the Behavioral Health Subcommittee the last few years, it was something that we did when we came back into the majority to create that specialized subcommittee, has been really helpful. Look, this is an issue that's affected just about every family in Washington State. And while we have made progress, we just have so much more work to do. One thing specific to Blake, I just want to say, that was one of the hardest issues I think that we've dealt with since I've been in the legislature, certainly since I've been as the majority leader. Part of it was the timing. We got a decision from the Supreme Court that was really a significant upending of longstanding law in the middle of session. And so while we passed what I thought was the best option available to us at the time, it also had a lot of supports, but those supports, because of the timing issue, have taken longer than we would have liked to get online. I think that's going to get better. But the other really important thing about the bill that we passed is that it has a 2-year sunset, because we knew this solution wasn't the permanent solution. And so we wanted to give time for everybody to be able to weigh in and be able to come up with a permanent solution that hopefully we'll put into place in the 2023 session.
I'll just quickly add in, I agree with both, I think this is so frustrating for legislators, because we have this is the area that I worked in before I became speaker spent a lot of time in behavioral health issues. And we have done so much to try and address them and to try and address issues. And we're not having as much effect as we would like. And so it's very frustrating. There's lots of things that are frustrating about it. But the other thing that I would add is what Senator Billig talked about in terms of having the 2-year sunset. And look, this is going to give us a chance, I think, really to talk with people who have lived experiences in all sorts of ways on this to help us design really the effective interventions. So I'm not going to argue that the interventions that were done in a bill that where we got a court decision in the middle of session, we had to get something done. I think it was a good start. And we got a long way to go, and we'll keep on being very persistent in addressing this.
This session.
Well, I think that we have this session and next session. My guess is there will likely be Blake bills that will be considered that are related to the Blake decision that will be considered this session. But we've got two sessions that we can before the bill sunsets. So we'll keep on working it.
Hannah, if I may, on this issue, I just want to make it clear to everyone, the bill that passed, if nothing happens in 2 years, it goes back to the Blake decision. So the folks that want for full legalization of drugs without access to treatment, all they have to do is hold their breath and not negotiate, and they get what they want. That's the real problem with this bill. If nothing happens, it goes back to the Blake decision. That should be unacceptable to the people of the state of Washington.
Well, and I just very quickly, I just want to say, I think that is a concern, and I shared that concern, but I think one of the things that this session, last session showed is that there wasn't a majority of people or even a significant number of people that wanted the Blake decision with everything being fully legalized to be the law of the land. So that is a concern, but I don't think that will win the day. I think that we'll come together with a solution that works for our
Yeah.
state.
Yeah, I think the House had almost, I think it had a super majority of members voting for the bill last year off the floor, very close to that.
Okay, thank you. I don't have time, Melissa.
What's that?
Timing is an issue, so I'll toss it back to you.
Yeah, so we were going to do a lightning round of questions to try and get really quick responses, but unfortunately I know these folks well enough to know their answers are, nuanced and not really quick. So I'd like to ask a couple of audience questions, and a couple of these maybe we'll try to do it like a lightning round and make it really quick. We got a question about gun control, specifically about banning open carry. And I'm curious, I believe it's about banning open carry of firearms. I know that's kind of happened. There's a bill to have banning open carry at protests and at the state capitol and things like that passed last year, but is there a potential or interest among you about banning open carry in general in our state of firearms? One word answers maybe. Let's try it. Madam Speaker?
Personal interest, maybe. I don't think there's maybe there's going to be a bill out there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Not the highest priority for gun accountability.
Representative Wilcox?
No.
Okay. Senator Braun?
No, this isn't our priority for this year. We got fish to fry.
Okay. Senator Billig?
I have not seen a bill on this, and same, not a priority. Gun safety is a priority, but not that particular approach.
Okay. Actually, let's try and do our lightning round, Hannah. Maybe, what do you think? Ask about the other gun bill.
I'm going to ask about the other gun bill. So once again, for the fourth or fifth year straight, we've got a ban on so-called high-capacity magazines bill that gun safety folks really want to see get done this year. There's been a change of the guard to some degree with Senator Lubbock now moved over to the Senate that I'm hearing a lot may make a difference in getting this across the finish line. I want to first start with Democrats and see if you think that that's true. Senator Billig.
Well, I think it's a reasonable bill. I think that there are many states. Many states across the country that have this limit. I think it's hard to justify why you need a magazine with dozens of rounds in it. So I do think it's a reasonable step for gun safety, and will make our state safer. And so whether we've got the votes to pass it, I don't know, but it's definitely one that we looked at last year and we will consider strongly again this year.
Okay, and we'll keep the answer short, but Speaker Jenkins, anything to add?
Ditto.
Great. Speaker Wilcox, how about you?
Did you call me Speaker Wilcox?
No, leader.
Okay, great. Anyway, the most common weapons that have magazine over 10 are also the most commonly possessed weapons for urban and suburban people for home defense. And I don't think they should be deprived of that defense option. So I'm a no.
And Senator Braun.
Yeah, it's ironic to me that we're talking about this at the same time we're dropping bills to reduce the penalties for drive-by shootings. That doesn't seem right to me. I'm focused on correcting the anti-police bills that were passed last year.
Yeah, I just want to say that every member gets to file whatever bills they want to file. And I'm sure that Senator Braun's, he's not going to defend every bill that has ever been filed by one of his members. That bill's not going anywhere, and that's a cheap shot, especially when the person who filed the bill had good intentions and is now getting death threats, right? It's okay. It is okay to critique bills. It is totally okay to critique them, to say they're bad, to say they're wrong, to oppose them. It is not okay to send death threats to members who file bills in good faith.
Well, I'm
not saying Senator Braun did that. I'm not saying Senator Braun did that. I'm just
thank
saying
you.
That's out there now.
There's no tolerance for that type of behavior. I want to be clear. I'm with you on that. And I didn't intend that as a cheap shot. I'm just saying that we have some wide variations in how we approach gun safety in the legislature. And as leaders, we should push back on all the more outrageous ones.
There's a question that came in from the audience regarding the B&O tax for small businesses. I feel like this is a topic every year about, I believe what we're talking about is changing the B&O tax so that maybe it doesn't apply to gross receipts, but the actual profits that businesses make, something like that, to make it less punitive for small businesses. Maybe we can try a lightning round on this complex tax topic. But Speaker Jenkins, is this something that the legislature might be able to delve into in the 60-day session? Yes or no?
Well, here's the issue, that a gross receipt, I am totally supportive of this idea of a gross or a net receipts tax rather than a gross receipts tax. It's totally unfair, right? You might not be making any income on your gross receipts, but that's considered an income tax in Washington, and our state Supreme Court has said that's not constitutional. So that's why we have a tax structure work group who's working on these issues. Whoever asked the question, I really encourage you to Google Washington's tax structure work group. It's bipartisan, bicameral. Tons of folks across the state are involved in it. Get your input in there, and they'll be providing recommendations to the legislature, not really for this session, but for next session. And we'll see what kind of things we can do to maybe redesign our really regressive tax structure in a way that helps our small businesses and family-owned businesses rather than hurts them.
Okay. Can I ask Senator Braun, do you think that there's any potential to actually address that issue this year? And what would you like to see happen if so? We'll keep it really quick. Few sentences.
I would say, I think 2 answers. 1, short session, really hard to do something this complex in a short session. But 2, we got nearly $10 billion, much of which is reoccurring surplus. That's the time to do tax reform. So there's a lot of things to say we ought to do tax reform. I think property tax reform, I think the speaker got it wrong. What we're proposing, and we undo the stuff that the current majority put into place in 2018 to reduce local property taxes, is the place I'd start. But I don't think, frankly, in a 60-day session, you get something this complex done and done well.
We have about a minute or two, maybe if Senator Billig or Speaker or Leader Wilcox. See, I almost gave you a promotion there. Want to weigh in quickly on this, but we don't have a lot of time.
It would be pretty simple to just raise the threshold on who has to pay that B&O tax. So that would be viable. It wouldn't provide probably the nuance that someone like, but it would help the smallest businesses and would not be hard, and it would be super easy to calculate what the cost was.
I actually have to hand it back to Whitney here, but Senator Billig, just a couple words, literally like one sentence. Any thought?
Yeah, just as a small business owner myself, I get frustrated with the B&O tax as well. But I think, as you've heard, it's really complex to do major changes. The change that Representative Wilcox mentioned definitely is something we've looked at in the past and could look at again.
Okay. I really wish we could have gotten more audience questions, but there's just been a lot of really interesting answers here for what we've had. So I appreciate everyone's participation, and I'm going to give it back to Whitney here. And thank you so much for everyone for coming and listening to an hour talk about policy.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what Melissa said, and I'm going to start by thanking you, Melissa and Hannah, for this valuable discussion that you facilitated. And I really want to thank all 4 of our elected officials. This is a perfect example of City Club's work and the value of having civil dialogue across differences. Not everyone agrees on everything, but it's wonderful to just be transparent and open and be able to witness a lot of these great conversations and get a perspective on what's ahead happening in our state. So thank you, everyone. I especially want to thank all of you for spending time with us this morning and being a part of this conversation. I hope it was a valuable experience, and I hope that you consider making a financial gift to support City Club in doing this critical work. This is an example, again, of our Dialogue Across Differences initiative. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day and a great weekend. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.